Hey, how you doing today? Who I got here with me today?
I'm Ralph Eubanks.
All right, so let's get into it. Let you introduce yourself, and we're gonna get into your backstory and all that. So I'm gonna let my partner take it off
Okay.
and take the lead. Go ahead.
All right.
Yeah, I just want to first say thank you for interviewing with us, taking the time out today.
Oh, happy to do it.
Yeah. So, tell us about how you came up, grew up. I know you're from Mississippi. Like, how was it growing up in Mississippi?
So I grew up in Mississippi. So I was born in Collins, Mississippi in 1957. So that's in Covington County, in the southern part of the state, down in the Piney Woods. I grew up on an 80-acre farm in Mount Olive, Mississippi, which is about 9 miles from Collins. So I came to Ole Miss as an undergraduate in 1974, and then went to the University of Michigan for my graduate work in 1978. And I've been in Washington, D.C. since 1982.
When did you know you had a passion for history?
I think I've always had a passion for for history and for writing. I think my background is actually in literature. So my graduate degree is in literature, in British literature, with a focus on modern British fiction. So I'm not what they would call in the literature business an Americanist. So really, English literature is my area of study. But I'm from the South. I've been writing about the South for the last, probably almost 40 years, really, now when I think about it. My first nationally syndicated published piece came out in 1980, I think it was 1987. So, or maybe it was 19, no, I think it was 1985. It's 1985. Yeah, so
So, from writing articles, how did you get involved in writing books? What made you want to?
Well, what really I was I was a book editor for many years. So I worked at the Library of Congress where I did books on the collections of the library. A lot of those books were history, a lot of them photography, but a lot of it American history. I think that's really where I kind of got locked into a lot of things with American history. And what you edit lots of books, then you begin to think about, you know, would I want to do this myself? I think I'd always thought about writing a book, but it wasn't until my I discovered my parents' names in the Sovereignty Commission files in 1999. That and the Sovereignty Commission files is Mississippi's spy agency during the Civil Rights Movement. And I had to figure out how they ended up in those files. And I'd read a couple of books about that time in Mississippi, and they didn't mention very much about that. So I had this idea to write this narrative history of the Sovereignty Commission. What I thought I would do is I would find all the people who were involved with it. They would be the characters, and I would tell the story of this somewhat sinister group. But finding my parents' names in the file made it very personal. So my first two books are really memoirs. My first book ever is a long time is a memoir of growing up in Mississippi, but I moved between the history of the Sovereignty Commission and how that overlaps with my personal history. And my second book, The House at the End of the Road, is a memoir of my grandparents, who were an interracial couple who married in South Alabama around 1915. They were actually married in Mississippi, but their marriage was illegal in both places. So, but my grandfather really kept people out of the place where they would have been harmed at this house at the end of a road. And that was so once you got to the end of the road, you were his. So those first two books were really strictly memoirs. And the second book was one that I had a Guggenheim Fellowship to write. So I got to take a year off to write that book. It was, a fellowship that paid me to be off from work for an entire year. And then I left the library in 2013. I'd done a lot of books there. I think probably about 100 books in the collections of the Library of Congress. And I edited the Virginia Quarterly Review, which is a 100-year-old literary journal published at the University of Virginia. So I was there for 2 years. And when I left, I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I ended up back in Mississippi teaching at Millsaps College. And during that time teaching at Millsaps, I started visiting the Delta because I visited there a great deal as a boy with my father, starting off in the Delta town of Mileston, which is where my parents lived and where my father moved when he graduated from Tuskegee Institute in 1949. So I started going to the Delta a lot. And then I actually, a year before I got to Millsaps, I reported a story for Wired Magazine on broadband access in the Delta. And that's kind of when the seeds of this book on the Delta started. But I had a hard time figuring out how to tell the story. And I knew it was a really big story. And then I got approached to write a book called A Place Like Mississippi. Someone wanted me to write about Mississippi's literary landscape. And they said they wanted the book to start in the Delta. But I knew it didn't start there. I knew that's where it ended. So I started the book on the Gulf Coast and then began to tell this whole story of why Mississippi produces so many great writers. And in the course of editing that book, one of the things that my editor noticed, because I knew I was not writing memoir, he kept asking me, well, where are you in this narrative? And I was really taking myself out of the narrative. And then I decided, and then he really guided me to tell me how to put myself in that narrative in a way that I wasn't interrupting the flow of the story, but I was actually adding to the story. And that was when I realized I had kind of found my voice to write this book. And so it was a very long process. So I put the Delta book aside, then went back to it, and then I applied for a fellowship at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard. And I spent a year there completely rethinking the book, doing research. I had two research assistants who helped me with the research, and then writing, going back and forth between Massachusetts and Mississippi, and it was during those trips back and forth. There were also people who had worked in the Delta with me at Harvard. And one of them said to me, there's someone, if you're going to write this story, there's someone that you have to meet who's going to help you tell that story. And that is how I met Gloria Carter Dickerson.
Okay.
That's how I met your aunt.
Right. Now, to step back just a little bit, can you tell the story of the Delta? What is the story of the Delta, in your opinion?
The story of the Delta is a complicated one. I say that the Mississippi Delta is a place of layered stories. There are lots of different stories, all layered on top of each other. And then on top of that, you also have the mythology of the Delta. And I allude to that mythology of the Delta in the title of the book when it's Darkness on the Delta, which is a song from the 1930s that became a very popular song at white Delta cotillions. It even talks about listening to the nightingales, even though there are no nightingales in the Delta. You know, darky singing sweet and low, lounging on levees. There's all these images, these romantic notions of the Delta that are there. And what I believe the story of the Delta is one that there's a lot of truth and pain, but then there's a lot of mythology that has been put there to cover up so people don't have to see that pain or think about that pain, which is why I have that, the first title is something that is alluding to that mythology. And the subtitle is alluding to the reality, how America's richest soil became its poorest land. The original subtitle was actually An American Reckoning, because I think the Delta is a place that what we have done, the ways that we have exploited it, we have extracted wealth from it, we have used people's labor sometimes for little compensation, little to no compensation. We have to reckon with that. And then there are also places that are like the Delta all around the country. So those places are connected. I see those as connected to the Delta. There's a connection between the Delta and Appalachia, the Black Belt of Alabama, uh, the Pine Belt in Georgia. There are lots of places like that all around the country, and we have to begin to reckon with why did we allow public policy to extract so much, or really for public policy to be so neglectful of places like this. And the basic reason that they're so neglectful of these places is that many of them are very poor people or they're black people. In Appalachia, it's poor white people. In the Delta, it's poor black people.
Right. Okay. And you said meeting my aunt Gloria. So explain to me, how did she help you write this story?
There's several ways that she helped me write this story. First of all, she told me her story. I had read the book Silver Rights, the Constance Curry book.
Right.
I knew the story, but hearing it directly from her kind of brought in a lot of other things that maybe I didn't know about that. But then learning about her work and the reason she had returned to Drew, that she'd worked for the Kellogg Foundation, and the Kellogg Foundation had decided to pull out of the Delta, and they said, well, we're not going to do this work anymore because we we are having a hard time. We have to change the mindset of the people, and we can't really change the mindset of the people. And Gloria said, well, who's doing that work? I'm going to do that work. And that's really what she has been doing, is changing the mindset of people there. And I think that's what I learned from talking with her, is that is the core work that has to be done, is getting people to think differently about this place, that where a lot of the people who are there accept a lot of the mythology about it. They accept the fact that, and I think one of the great myths, or it's not a myth, maybe it's actually it's a lie, is maybe a better way to put it, is that the people who have remained in the Delta weren't smart enough to get out during the Great Migration. And that's not true. People stayed because they had family ties, because they loved the land. They liked being there. And it's not that they weren't smart enough to leave. It's that they thought, we're going to finally make a way here, and we're going to create some change here. And that's why people remain. And one of the things I think people forget about the Delta, we think about the Delta as a poor place. And when we think about poor people, we think they are poor because largely because they have not, they don't have the inner resources to get out of poverty. And that's so far from the truth. And that's one of the things I really wanted to get to, is that we really need to confront these myths we have about poor people and poverty. As the sociologist Matthew Desmond says, poverty is a policy choice. And that is a choice that we have made in the Delta. It's a policy choice. We have made that policy choice to allow this place to be poor, and really to set it up as a regional other. When I arrived back in Mississippi in 2016, someone said to me, it was a politician, said to me, if Mississippi didn't have the Delta, it would rank 25th in the nation. And I fact checked that. It's a total lie. That's not true. The Delta is a small percentage of Mississippi's population. Poverty is widespread across this entire state. But when we're thinking about poverty, we pin it all on the Delta, because we have set the Delta up as an other. And that means that it's not a problem in other places. It's only a problem there. And if we can pin it on the Black and the poor, then we don't have to take responsibility for it everywhere else.
You mentioned the Great Migration earlier, and you still see that today with a lot of people moving out of Mississippi. Why do you think Mississippians don't value Mississippi?
I don't think it's that people don't value Mississippi. It's that Mississippi isn't giving them a reason to stay. That uh, that Mississippi isn't providing a range of opportunities for people to stay here. And one of those that, for young people today, you really need kind of a vibrant urban center. And for us, that would be Jackson. And we have disinvested in Jackson. Jackson's a delta. It's not in the delta, but it is set up as an other within Mississippi. So again, that's a policy choice. That is by design. So essentially, Mississippi kind of thinks, well, we've got to do things to attract people to stay here. Yet we continue to vilify a place that if we work together and built that place up and maybe diversify the type of industries that are part of that, the fabric of that city, we'd have more young people who wanted to stay here. But Mississippi has this very, shall we say, resistance to urban spaces because they equate urbanness with blackness, and they don't want those. They don't want those two things to kind of to be at the center of the state, even though this is the blackest state in America.
How much do you think racism has held Mississippi back?
Well, that's one of the things that I look at in this book is that I was really looking at three questions. What are the policy, political, and cultural issues that have disadvantaged the people in the Mississippi Delta? What are the myths that keep us from seeing them? And what role does race play in shaping that mythology? And race plays a big role, not just in the Delta, but in this whole state in shaping that mythology. Where I go back to that, at least in the civil rights era, is with the rise of Head Start. And people, when Head Start became something that you could, when you had the Child Development Group of Mississippi coming into being around 1964, it's run by former civil rights activists, and it's vilified by John Stennis and James Eastland because it is run by former civil rights workers, people that had worked against policies that they didn't want to see enacted. And it was also employing Black women and getting Black women out of the employ of white homes. That's what was, and then, so it was, and it was also giving these Black people financial independence for the first time. That's what it was all about. Yet the myth is that these people who are running this are corrupt. And we see that pattern again and again. We talk about people being corrupt. It's happening today in Minnesota with the Somalians. We're saying they're corrupt. And there is some corruption there, but that's not the whole story. But we're using that to kind of change policy. That's what they did with the Child Development Group in Mississippi. They said they were corrupt, and that helped bring the state of Mississippi to get control.
The camera shut out.
It was 20 minutes, so yeah.
I know. My camera does the same thing because I have this camera.
Oh, okay. Right.
It does the same thing.
All right. Cool.
I would not. I mean, I think we romanticize that period because there was this unity, and the reason we were so unified is because we had to be to survive. There was the fear. So that's. I mean, as someone who lived through that time, I would not go back to it. I would not want to go back there. And people wanting to go back saying, well, we had it better then. No, we didn't. So that's the way that I think about it. What happened was that as we as people were able to shop anywhere, we had to, I think black businesses also had to evolve and change in some way that didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is there wasn't a lot of support of them uh, by organizations like the Small Business Administration. And that's something that we see a lot when, historians have really pointed out after the civil rights movement that what we really needed to work on that we didn't work on was economic justice and economic equality. And the reason those businesses existed was because of that inequality. And we should have found a way to help keep those businesses going in a much more multiracial society. But we didn't because no one really understood that. It's something that I don't think anyone really understood how core these black businesses were to communities. And when it began to fall apart, everyone began to blame them for, not keeping up. But it wasn't that they didn't keep up as much as it was that no one understood how they kind of fit into the whole economic infrastructure of communities. No one understood it.
Do you think we're still dealing with that today?
Yes, we are. We're still very much dealing with that. Um, and Tim Lampkin, who I speak with in my book, says that there are two ways that he talks about his group, Higher Purpose. When he's talking with black folks about his work, he really talks about trying to build a network of black businesses in the Delta. When he's talking with white people, he has to talk about this development of entrepreneurship because this idea of a network of black businesses in the Delta, it scares a lot of white people because that means they're going to have to share economic power with black people, and they don't want to do that.
So, what do you think could save Mississippi?
Well, that's a tall order. And I think I think the first thing that could save Mississippi is we need to be much more honest about our history. And I think, first of all, then we have to also, in reckoning with that history, begin to think about, well, how is that history, how are those things from the past continuing to repeat themselves in the present? For example, we have a debate going on in this state continuously every year about school choice. I know that and they're talking about it in the same way they talked about freedom of choice when they were trying to keep segregation going. So you've got the same language going, yet not people don't necessarily hear it. So history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And you have to figure out where the rhyme is. And I think that's one of the things that it's so important to have these intergenerational conversations because someone my age knows how it rhymes. Someone your age may not necessarily recognize that. And that's why those conversations are so important. So we understand those connections between how the past is entering the present. That's really important. So for Mississippi to move forward, that's what we have to do. Our past is ever present.
Do you feel like Governor Tate Reeves? Do you think he is the best Mississippi?
No, it is not the best in Mississippi. And I think that we have leaders like Governor Reeves because of fear. And there and it is fear on the part of a lot of white people. I think they're white people who, if you talk with them, they would say that they don't have a racist bone in their body, that they don't, that they have black friends. They would talk about all these things, and they would say, and if you sat down and talked with them, you'd probably think there's not a lot of difference between what it is we're thinking. They will vote for someone like Tate Reeves because they're afraid of somehow the status quo not being disrupted. And that is the fear. And somehow we have to kind of crack that cycle of fear of white people of maintaining the status quo in this state. And that is what is so, that's what's afraid. And I have talked with young people who supported Tate Reeves, are who would identify themselves as anti-racist, but they would vote for Tate Reeves because they feel that he embodies these good Christian values. And by Christian values, those are white Christian values. And they're saying that, but they don't even recognize the connection between those things. And why do you think there's such a push these days to not discuss our past so much? Because if you talk about that enough, people begin to understand, they begin to see the connections, they begin to look at things differently, they begin to question what our leaders are doing. That is what this is all about. Mississippi is trying to keep its people ignorant as much as they can so that the politicians who are running the state and not running it very well can continue to remain in power.
Right. So right now, are you working for the University of Mississippi?
I am working for the University of Mississippi, yes.
So how would you explain, like, do you feel like University of Mississippi has taken a step in the right direction as far as those kind of relations goes, or are they still in the past too?
I think the university has taken a lot of steps in the right direction. There are ways that it's thinking in the past, and I see part of my job as both a professor and my role as faculty fellow looking at the work of Black Power activists in 1970, looking at that is to get the university to fully reckon with its past. And it's a continuous process. Also, we have to reckon with the fact that this is a place that is built on enslaved labor. The university is built on enslaved labor. You know, the Lyceum, Barnard Observatory, where my office is, that I go to every day. I work in a building built by enslaved labor. The Croft Building. Those are, all these antebellum buildings that we have on campus. We have to reckon with the ways that we're not dealing with that past. Ole Miss has gone a lot farther than I ever expected. If you told me that I would be working here when I was in graduate school, I would have said no. I would not. I will never be there again. Yet I'm back. And it's the advice that I give to a lot of young people who ask me, should I stay in Mississippi? I say, well, don't come back unless you have something you want to do here, that you want to accomplish here. And for me, one of the great accidents of my life is being back in Mississippi, working with developing this history of this Black Power protest from 1970, filling in the gaps of that history. And I know that there are going to be people after me who are going to know about this well after I'm gone. And it will really help that next generation. I feel I came back to do something like that. And and I think that a lot of young people who leave, if you come back, it's not because you want to kind of feel the warm suns of home. It's that you want to do something for your home. One of the things I recognized while I was working on this book, I spent a lot of time looking at the archive of the poet June Jordan, who came to Mississippi in 1970. And she interviewed a lot of activists. And I realized that she was interviewing some of the children of those activists who were my age. And I started looking up, well, where are they now? They're not in Mississippi anymore. So we lost a whole generation of activists. And I think that's why maybe Mississippi didn't continue to progress as much as we would have liked, because we lost a generation of activists. Because it's, civil rights is a constant struggle. And I think what happened at the end of the civil rights movement is everyone was exhausted. And people who were the top leaders in the movement, if you begin to study what it is that they did in those years, a lot of them had, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder. They had to, they're, I mean, if you talk with Rena Evers Everett and you ask her about the night her father was murdered, and she will tell you that entire story, it's like she's going through the reel of her life. But you can see where the PTSD is affecting her. So we and I think that PTSD kept us from continuing that level of activism that really need to continue in Mississippi to keep progress going.
So where would someone start with the activism?
I think probably locally. I mean, really, at local office. It's where it all that's where it all begins. You know, local. It begins in communities, and I think that's really where it is. Doing community work, because we have communities here that are dying, and we're not even asking ourselves why they are dying. We're looking at little towns in the Delta that that don't have grocery stores. And the reason they don't have grocery stores is they don't have enough people to support them. And then the reason we don't have enough people to support them is the people there don't have enough jobs. What are we? If you look at economic development in Mississippi, if you look at where it's all happening east of I-55. There's nothing that's happening west of I-55. And what is mostly west of I-55? It's the Delta. And if we started to focus on economic development in that part of the state, it could really be transformative.
I want to talk about the NIL era now. Do you feel like when it comes to sports, it's forcing the University of Mississippi to have to evolve, to keep getting this money and keep getting these great players in?
It is forcing them to evolve, because I will give you a great example of that. So the university moves the Confederate statue, and it moves it to the Confederate cemetery, but it was still visible to the football players, and they made sure that it was no longer visible. Someone wanted to kind of come into that cemetery and make it almost like a Confederate Disneyland. That did not happen because of the power of those black football players. So yes, black athletes have a role to play in all of this, and they are playing a role. My only uh, issue is, I wish that as much as our black athletes are involved in sports, I wish they were as equally involved in making sure they get an education while they're here, because your body's going to give out. And what are you left with if you don't have an education? So that is my only issue there.
Do you think the university is scared to pick a side when it comes to getting athletes here, or kind of like the history of the university, like pleasing those people?
I think the history of the university keeps us from recruiting athletes. I think that history does, yes. And I don't think we're necessarily picking sides. It is just that we have to show how we're reckoning with that history. And that's something that is incredibly important for us to do. I think probably more so than Mississippi State, say. Mississippi State's founded after the Civil War. Yet the thing that no one really talks about is Mississippi State's first president was a Confederate general. So there is still the connection to the Confederacy there, and there's still things that are going on there that have affected the culture of that school that we don't necessarily talk about. We have to talk about ours, uh, and Mississippi State has a larger, black student body than the University of Mississippi. Yet, I mean, yes, ours did increase 50% this year, but still it is larger because there's this perceived idea that this place doesn't have that history, but it does. And I think that's the danger. All these universities, we have to reckon with that history of segregation that that stands at the core of this. Mississippi has so many state universities. I was giving a lecture out in Nevada at the University of Nevada, Reno Lake Tahoe. And I realized that Nevada, you have concentration of population in Las Vegas, Reno, Lake Tahoe. I think maybe Carson City. There are a few other, but Nevada's population is pretty close to Mississippi's, but there are fewer state universities because they didn't have a segregated system there. And that's why we have so many. It's why we're supporting so many. So we've got more institutions of higher learning than we can actually support as a state because of that legacy of segregation. And that is one of the things that has
Your
held us
favorite
back.
cities and experiences in the Delta?
I think probably I was fascinated with Mound Bayou and Mound Bayou's history, especially with Taborian Hospital. Um, was interested in Drew. Drew is a town that had more cotton gins than anywhere in America. Uh, I spent 4 months living in Clarksdale. I really enjoyed my time in Clarksdale, but it made me begin to think a lot about blues tourism and what what are the people who are gaining from blues tourism the artists themselves, and who's actually benefiting from that tourism, and is that tourism maybe diluting the power of the blues? Those are all questions that I found myself asking. Found I kept asking myself. So that was, I mean, I enjoyed all of my time in the Delta, but I have to say, I enjoyed living in Clarksdale. I really did enjoy living there. I had a great experience living there, but living in the Delta, the one thing that I learned is when you live in a place like the Delta, poverty is no longer an abstraction. I had a very nice apartment there, one that was usually rented by foreign tourists. My next door neighbor didn't have a place nearly as nice as mine. He didn't have a washer and dryer because he was hanging out his laundry in the alley. So that inequity, I could see that inequity at work in the Delta. And that's why it's no longer an abstraction when you're there. And I think that's probably the thing that I learned the most from living there.
Okay. How do you think the culture of the Delta differs from the rest of Mississippi?
I think the culture of the Delta is different because of its history. And a lot of that history is rooted in the fact that there's a legacy of sharecropping, the legacy of convict leasing. You have parchment. There are all these things that are part of the fabric of the Delta that the rest of the state doesn't have. And there is, with the plantation, there is also the plantation mentality that people are, you know, the plantation as an institution that employed sharecroppers. It's been gone for, you know, 2 generations. Yet the mindset that kept that system going is still very much there. Um, you know, kids don't even question the fact that there are these private academies that are there where only white people go to school. They've just accepted that that's what it is. And as my friend, the theologian David Dark says, we become what we normalize. And this separation has been normalized. This plantation mentality has been normalized. So we have to begin to question those things that we have normalized and begin to change them.
Right, because it was a point in time, even here in Oxford, where our superintendent was trying to make a separate school, and they kind of masked it as it's gonna be a school for people who can't afford lunch and stuff like that. And then immediately it got turned down.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, there are ways that people try to bring in segregation into a system that will make it feel better for wealthy white people to have their children in a public school. Yeah, I mean, that's that's so much a part of the fabric of this country, but you see it profoundly in the Delta because you know North Sunflower Academy is founded in 1965. The Carter family integrated Drew High School in 1965, and other academies are 1970. Alexander v. Holmes case orders school integration in 1970. So all those schools started on January 6th of 1970 when everyone went back to school. I was one of those students who went back to school after that. I remember that every year there was a few empty seats in my classroom because some kid had gone off to the academy. So slowly losing white students.
Right. So I mean, how do you feel about the academies in general? Like, what are they trying to come? Just keeping the divide?
They're just trying to keep the divide going. But what they're saying now is that they're Christian schools.
Hmm.
So there is this that they're providing a Christian education. Yet, we'll let black people come in as long as they're student athletes for us and help us win games.
Yeah, but then I can see that with like some of these schools, like MRA, that they
Yeah.
get ranked up there high with
Yeah.
football now and stuff like that.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what. So we have. I mean, you you can't have a good education system if it's divided, and also you can't have a society where people solve problems if they don't go to school together.
And I can see that too because going to school in Oxford, since we didn't have the academies, like the relationship between blacks and white kind of gelled together. Like it wasn't a lot of racist
Yeah.
between us until people started getting older. Like maybe like going into high school, but as far as like elementary, people were like best friends. But I don't know what kind of happens to people once you get older. It's just like the divide started happening. I never understood that part.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I'm the member of the first class that went through 4 years of high integrated high school together, and there was a lot of work to keep us separate during those 4 years. And I just had my 50th high school reunion. The high school reunion was supposed to end, I think, at 5 o'clock. Around 6:30, we're all still there talking. It's like we had to catch up. We had that was the thing. We had to catch up because there were all these things. There's so much work had been done to keep us separate, but we realized how much we had in common. And that's one of the things I say all the time. Every cross-racial conversation begins not with what's different about you, but what you have in common. And we often neglect that at our peril.
Do you think Mississippi can ever get past racism?
I wish I knew the answer to that, Jason. Uh, it depends on a lot of things. It depends on as I said, it depends on primarily on our confronting our history. I mean, think about it. We just had the brochures removed from the Medgar Evers home because Byron D. Beckwith was referred to as a racist. So we have to, you know, we but right now, that's not Mississippi doing that. That's actually the National Park Service. So I can't put that on the state of Mississippi. So much of it has to do with our entire country kind of reckoning with this. I think we place a lot of our racial burdens on Mississippi. And what's happening right now is we're everybody in all 50 states, we're all living in Mississippi right now. Yeah, we're all living in Mississippi.
And I know you mentioned the Sovereignty Commission
Yes.
earlier. Okay, can you tell us about anything you or your family experienced? Like, did you ever hear them speak about that at the time it was going on, or was that something that you kind of discovered later on in
It's
your
something I
career?
discovered later on. I did not know about it. It was mentioned briefly in my Mississippi history textbook that was it was something that was helping the state of Mississippi at that time. It's painted in a very positive light. It wasn't even talked about. I don't think I learned about it until Jerry Mitchell at the Clarion Ledger broke a story about the fact that you could tell that the first Medgar Evers trial, there was jury tampering that was going on. And he found that through the Sovereignty Commission files, which were in the papers of Governor Paul B. Johnson at the University of Southern Mississippi. At this point, the Sovereignty Commission files were supposed to be closed for 50 years. So they weren't supposed to be open until 2023. But because they leaked out, a lawsuit came about that said, okay, we have to open these. And that's when I began to look at them. So one of the things that happened when they were open, they said, if we're going to open these files, and there's a lot of rumor and innuendo in those files. So that's one of the things you get a sense of the culture of Mississippi at that time, but not everything in there is true. So there were ways that you could actually kind of opt out and get your name redacted from it, or you could have you could assert privacy rights about things that were in the files. And that was one of the things that Ed King, who was a white civil rights activist, was very vocal about that. But Mississippi had created such an environment of fear and suspicion that he was just trying to preserve privacy rights. But that led people to think, what is it that he's been hiding all these years? So, which is really unfortunate because he's a good man who did a lot of good work for the civil rights movement, but that fear and suspicion is very much there. So kind of the thing about the Sovereignty Commission that I learned from my work in those files is that climate of fear and suspicion that it created. And we're still dealing with the legacy of that in a lot of ways. So again, if we understand that we did that for such a long time and come and reckon with that, we can move forward. I mean, this is something I often bring up in my class on the civil rights movement. And this is not my thinking, it is the thinking of a sociologist by the name of Erica Chenoweth, who studies nonviolent social movements. And she says there's one important piece of that is reconciliation. Reconciliation is not having a kumbaya moment. Reconciliation is actually having discussions about how you're going to work together down the road together. And that was the thing we never did. We never said, okay, we have these laws now, community by community. How are we going to move down the road together? Instead, people formed academies. They went off. There are ways that people kind of voted with their feet that they didn't. So we never had that moment where we decided how to work together down the road. And that's one of the things that's missing. We have to have that moment of reconciliation. We have to begin that process. And it's long and it's hard, but we've never done it.
I understand. And you mentioned like Mississippi literature. Like, who are some of your favorite writers that kind of inspired you, like Mississippi authors?
Well, Richard Wright is probably one. I'm teaching Richard Wright's Black Boy, his memoir, growing up in Mississippi right now. Um, so Richard Wright, William Attaway, who's from Greenville, Mississippi, who wrote a book called Blood on the Forge. It's a book that I really love. Margaret Walker, Eudora Welty, uh, more contemporary writers, Kiese Lehman, Natasha Trethewey, Jessamine Ward. I mean, we have so many writers. In Oxford, Mississippi, there are 49 working writers who are actively writing and publishing. So we have a wealth of literary talent right here in this town and all throughout this state. I was just on the Gulf Coast where I was with Jessamine Ward and trying to remember the writer who was also with her, and he Jason Reynolds. And Jason Reynolds said to Jessamine, "I see why you've never left." She said, "This is a beautiful place. I love this. I've never been to the Gulf Coast. I really love this place." And he was drawn into it all. So yeah, Mississippi has we have given a lot to the rest of the world. And I think we have to we've given music to the world. We've given literature to the world. We've given a lot of culture to the world. It's all come from here. A lot of it from the Delta. So we have to take pride in the fact that that there's so much that America would not have without Mississippi.
In your book, When is Darkness on the Delta, what is the one message that you wanted that book to convey?
The one message that I want that book to convey is to change what we see on the Delta, because we often see it as this impoverished, abandoned place. We have to change what we know about the place. And when you understand the complexities of the place, what you see there begins to change. And that is the one message I would want to have people take away from this, to begin to change their way of seeing about the Delta. And by reading this book, it will change what you know, so it will change what you see.
Is there anything else you wanted to add or leave with us before we get up out of here, Dr. Ralph?
No, I've so enjoyed talking with both of you. It's been a real delight. So no, I don't have anything else that I want to say. I think I've said enough.
Hey, once again, man, I want to appreciate you for taking the time to talk with us, man.
Well,
I enjoyed the conversation as well.
I appreciate your thinking that I'm a I'm a worthwhile subject for you to talk with. So I appreciate that.
All right, man. I guess we'll wrap it up. We got
Okay.
Dr. Ralph in the lab, Global Minds Entertainment.